Hello. In this segment, we take up Ray Franz's discussion of the first rumblings about apostasy. Groupthink, gossip, and apostasy at the highest levels of government in the Watchtower. Ray Franz goes on, none of these cases were brought up in the governing body session. That is, he's talking here about the rumors that were going around that certain members of the governing body and other headquarters staff were making dissonant statements about matters that they should be holding to the stated or published truths of the Watchtower. This rumor was going around, and it was certainly true in the case of Fred Franz, but of course he wasn't the one under attack at this point. So Ray Franz goes on. None of these cases were brought up in the governing body sessions, however, and I felt no inclination to do so. But I sensed that a definite undercurrent was running, that sooner or later would come into the open. And I had no doubt that when it did, its force would be directed not against any such persons, but against myself, and outside the body, Edward Dunlap. Dunlap was, although not a governing body member, significant as part of the writing staff. He had written, for instance, the commentary on James in the 70s. Due to the sentiment that I could discern on the part of several members, I had already been weighing the advisability of resigning from the service committee, thus limiting my participation in committee membership to just the writing committee. One day, in conversation with Robert Wallen, who acted as secretary for the service committee, although not himself a governing body member, I mentioned that I had about decided to drop off that committee. His response was, "You can't do that. There has to be some balance on the committee." He urged me to change my mind. However, the same adverse sentiment expressed in the November 14th, 1979 session surfaced in another session, and as I had thought, I now came in for specific mention. In the course of the session, Lloyd Barry, who had the responsibility of seeing that each issue of the Watchtower magazine was put together and ready for publishing, voiced strong concern over the fact that I had not placed my signature on a considerable number. He gave the number of Watchtower articles circulated in the writing committee. Each article due to be published was first circulated among 5 committee members, and their signatures at the top indicated approval. While not understanding his reason for bringing the matter up in a full session, rather than speaking first to me privately or at a writing committee meeting, I acknowledged that what he stated was true. I was actually surprised to hear the exact number of articles I had not signed, since I kept no count. He had. I explained that I had not signed in those cases simply because I could not do so conscientiously. At the same time, I had made no effort whatsoever to impede the publication of those particular articles, some of them being articles written by the president, that is his uncle, on the prophecy of Jeremiah, and laying much stress on the prophetic role of the organization and on certain dates, such as 1914 and 1919. Nor had I made any effort to create an issue of the matter. My signature's absence represented abstention, not opposition. In a few minutes we'll get to Jerry Gladson and his experience of the parallel to this in the Seventh-day Adventist organization almost at the very same time as this. I stated before the entire body that if this view was viewed as a problem, if having someone refrain from signing for conscientious reasons was viewed as undesirable, then there was a simple solution. They could appoint someone else to serve on the writing committee who would not feel such conscientious restraint about approving material. I mentioned at that time my thoughts about resigning from the service committee so as to spend more time contributing to the needs of the writing department. So I placed the matter in their hands and made it clear that whatever disposition they chose to make would be acceptable to me. After the session, Lyman Swingle, then the coordinator of both the writing committee and the writing department, spoke to me in his office and said, "You can't do this to me. If they decide on their own to replace you on the writing committee, all right, but don't you offer to resign." He spoke with considerable force. I told him I was simply leaving it up to the body, but that I was tired of controversy and would be happy for anything that would lessen some of the strain I felt. He repeated his urging. The body, somewhat surprisingly it seems to Ray, made no change in his assignment. Nonetheless, I had a strong presentiment of trouble brewing, but I had no way of knowing that within 6 months I would find myself in the midst of a storm of near fanatical intensity, with the governing body reacting with harsh measures to what it viewed as a conspiracy of serious proportions, one that threatened the very heart of the organization. Consider now what this dangerous conspiracy actually was, just how massive its proportions were, how great the criminality, that's their word, of those involved was, what the justification was for the stage of siege mentality that developed within the organization and which continues to this day, that is 1983, the events that led up to the purge in the spring of 1980. At which point it's appropriate to pick up from Jerry Gladson his experience within the Seventh-day Adventists. In the appendix to this book, A Theologian's Journey from Seventh-day Adventism to Mainstream Christianity, Jerry Gladson talks about the badge of Seventh-day Adventism, just as you saw in the references in Ray Franz to his uncle Fred, now President Franz's resistance to changing 1914 because of its connection with 1919, and somehow that all being connected to the prophetic authority of the Watchtower organization. So in Seventh-day Adventism, Gladson notes, there's the connection between their peculiar dogma of the Sabbath and their identity as God's chosen people. So Gladson picks up the connection this way about the Sabbath. Is it obligatory? Will it be a final test for all humanity? Given such stern admonitions as Galatians 1:6-9, where Paul curses twice those who come up with a different gospel, Adventists must demonstrate from the New Testament, beyond a shadow of a doubt, their claim that the Sabbath is obligatory upon Christians. If the Sabbath is to become the universal test of all humanity, it should be transparently clear in the pages of Scripture, the universally accepted guidebook for Christians. Otherwise, the test would be blatantly unfair. What kind of God would make a test of something that is not clear? This is the issue with cults, is it not? That they set up badges of divine identity which are not clear in Scripture, and you need the interpretive skills of the organization or the new religion to understand them. Gladson goes on, if they are going to make this kind of claim for the seventh-day Sabbath, we have a right to expect of Adventists unequivocal, compelling evidence. I believe at least three considerations count against this Adventist claim. Adventist interest in the seventh-day Sabbath goes back to their roots in the restoration impetus of the early 19th century. In the 1800s, numerous religious movements arose intent on recovering the beliefs, pattern, and life of the New Testament church, purified of unnecessary accretions. Such widely differing groups as the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, the Mormons, the Church of Christ, scientists, that is, those we call Christian scientists, the Christian Church, the disciples of Christ, that is, the Church of Christ, the parent group of the disciples, and the Jehovah's Witnesses, as well as Seventh-day Adventists, all were results of the Restorationist movement. The diversity of all these denominations, however, illustrates a profound problem with Restorationism. The New Testament itself is sufficiently ambiguous on some points to leave room for a certain diversity of understanding on certain issues. Within the early church, different orientations or perspectives made themselves at home. This is true with respect to the Sabbath as well. We might think of these early orientations as trajectories because they eventually extend themselves across history into the postures around the Sabbath we have noted above. So according to Jerry Gladson's point of view, you cannot use such ambiguous statements of the New Testament, things about which the New Testament and the whole Bible are not clear, as badges of identity to mark you off from other Christians. This is against the spirit of Galatians 1:6-9, which talks about another gospel, one which brings a curse, a double anathema upon those who adhere to them, these distinctive gospels. So the comparison is clear with the Watchtower's badge, which is of course their door-to-door visitation, but specifically attached to the peculiar message they bear about eschatology, 1914, and all the superstructure chronology built around that, based on the book of Daniel and the book of Revelation. In the next segment, we take up again the progress of Ray Franz's decision that he had to do something, and he had to do it soon.